Picture this: April 28, 1945. The Third Reich is dying, burning, collapsing into ash and screaming chaos. Allied forces sweep across France like a cleansing fire, liberating towns that had spent 5 years under the swastika's shadow. In the Lorraine region, near the ancient city of Metz, a Wehrmacht convoy races along back roads that wind through limestone hills honeycombed with centuries-old quarry tunnels. Leading that convoy is Oberst Ernst Hartmann, a career officer who'd built his reputation not on battlefield victories, but on the construction of underground fortifications that Allied bombers couldn't touch. He's carrying documents that 3 governments will spend the next 66 years trying to find. And in 72 hours, he will vanish into the earth as completely as if he'd never existed. The Lorraine region had been German territory before the First World War, became French after Versailles, and been reclaimed by the Reich in 1940. Its landscape was riddled with abandoned stone quarries dating back to medieval times, vast underground networks that had provided building materials for cathedrals and castles across Europe. The Germans, recognizing the military potential of these existing tunnels, had spent 4 years expanding them into a subterranean fortress system they codenamed Festung Kalkstein, Fortress Limestone. Most of it remained undocumented, deliberately excluded from official maps, known only to the engineers who'd built it and the officers who commanded within it. Oberst Ernst Hartmann was one of those officers. Born in 1898 in Frankfurt to a family of civil engineers, he'd served in the trenches during the First World War and emerged with an obsessive understanding of defensive architecture. He'd watched men die in exposed positions, seen entire battalions obliterated by artillery they never saw coming. His conclusion was simple and absolute. The future of warfare belonged to those who could fight from beneath the earth. By 1941, when he was assigned to oversee German fortification projects in occupied France, Hartmann had become the Wehrmacht's leading expert on underground military installations. His work in Lorraine began in early 1942, when German intelligence identified the region's quarry systems as ideal locations for command posts, supply depots, and medical facilities that could survive the heaviest Allied bombardment. Hartmann personally surveyed the sites, mapping hundreds of miles of tunnels, identifying chambers that could be reinforced, passages that could be expanded, natural defensive positions that required only minimal modification. His reports, filed with meticulous detail to regional command, described a network that could house 10,000 soldiers, operate independently for 6 months, and coordinate military operations across all of northeastern France. But there was another project, one that appeared in no official reports. A command post buried deeper than any other installation, connected to the main quarry network through passages so narrow and convoluted that even detailed maps wouldn't guarantee finding it. Hartmann called it Sperrbrecher, barrier breaker. Only 17 people knew it existed, and by May 1945, 16 of them would be dead, disappeared, or denying they'd ever heard the name. Construction of Sperrbrecher began in October 1943, during a period when the tide of war had clearly turned against Germany. Hartmann requisitioned workers and materials through channels that bypassed standard military bureaucracy, using authorizations that appeared legitimate but couldn't be traced back to any specific commanding officer. A workforce of 200 men, primarily French laborers conscripted under occupation laws, spent 9 months carving Hartmann's vision from solid limestone 120 feet beneath the surface. One of those workers was a stonemason named Claude Mercier, who survived the war and gave testimony to French intelligence officers in 1947. According to Mercier, the work was unlike any military construction project he'd witnessed during 5 years of forced labor for the Germans. The main chamber they created was circular, 40 meters in diameter, with walls reinforced by steel and concrete that seemed excessive for a simple command post. The ceiling had been carved in a dome pattern that Mercier recognized from his pre-war work on church restorations. But more disturbing were the secondary chambers branching off from the main space, each one sealed behind steel doors that required specialized keys to open. And the storage rooms, massive vaulted spaces filled with crates that arrived under armed guard and were never opened in the workers' presence. Mercier also described Hartmann's behavior during this period. The colonel spent days underground, supervising every detail personally, often working alongside the laborers with an intensity that bordered on manic. He spoke little, ate less, and seemed to require almost no sleep. But Mercier recalled his eyes, constantly moving, always calculating, as if he were seeing something in the stone that no one else could perceive. Once, when Mercier asked why such elaborate construction was necessary for what appeared to be a standard command facility, Hartmann's response stayed with him for the rest of his life. "We're not building this for the war we're fighting. We're building it for what comes after." By July 1944, Speerbrecher was operational. A garrison of 43 men had been assigned to the facility, though their names appeared on no unit roster and their faces were never photographed. They were specialists, communications experts, cryptographers, intelligence analysts, men whose skills suggested this was no ordinary military installation. Radio intercepts from the period, declassified in 1989, referenced transmissions from the Lorraine region using call signs that matched no known German military units. The messages were encrypted with codes Allied intelligence never cracked, discussing operations and objectives that made no tactical sense in the context of the collapsing Reich. Hartmann commanded Speerbrecher from a private office carved into the rock at the deepest point of the complex. Those few who entered that office and survived to speak of it described walls covered with maps that showed not current military positions, but geographical features: underground water sources, cave systems, ancient Roman catacombs, geological surveys of limestone formations across Europe, as if Hartmann wasn't planning military operations but something else entirely, something that required knowledge of what lay beneath the surface of the continent. The first indication that something was wrong came in December 1944, when a Gestapo investigation team arrived to audit Speerbrecher's supply requisitions. The facility was consuming resources at levels far beyond what its official garrison size justified. Food, medical supplies, fuel, all delivered in quantities that suggested the presence of hundreds of additional personnel. But when the investigators descended into the complex, they found only the authorized 43 men, all present and accounted for. The excess supplies had simply vanished. The Gestapo officers spent 3 days conducting interviews and inspecting storage rooms. On the 4th day, they ascended to the surface, filed a report clearing Hartmann of any impropriety, and returned to their headquarters in Metz. 2 weeks later, all 4 investigators died in what was officially recorded as an Allied air raid. The building they'd been in was the only structure hit in that neighborhood. By March 1945, with Allied forces closing in from the west and the Reich's collapse inevitable, Berlin ordered all command posts in the Lorraine region to evacuate or surrender. Hartmann acknowledged the order but requested 48 hours to destroy sensitive documents and disable communications equipment. Permission was granted. He sent most of his garrison to the surface with instructions to report to retreating German units. Only 7 men remained with him in Speerbrecher. Their names are unknown, their fate is uncertain. But what is documented through a single radio transmission intercepted by French resistance fighters is Hartmann's final message to regional command. Transmitted on April 28, 1945 at 21:47 hours, the message was brief and cryptic. Speerbrecher protocol complete. Sealing primary access. All secondary routes compromised as planned. Archive transferred to final location. Do not attempt recovery. Repeat, do not attempt recovery. Site will remain dormant until conditions permit reactivation. The transmission ended with an authentication code that matched Hartmann's credentials. Then, silence. When Allied forces liberated Metz on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day, they found a city celebrating freedom but also dealing with the practical reality of occupying infrastructure the Germans had controlled for 5 years. Military intelligence teams began systematic searches of known German installations, expecting to find abandoned equipment, perhaps a few holdouts refusing to surrender. What they didn't expect was to find absolutely nothing about Speerbrecher. The quarry systems of Lorraine were vast, and Allied forces spent weeks exploring them, documenting supply depots, field hospitals, ammunition stores, all the expected infrastructure of an occupying military force. But they found no trace of Hartmann's command post. Local resistance fighters, questioned extensively, had heard rumors of a deeper facility, something important enough that German security had been unusually tight in certain areas, but none could provide specific locations. The forced laborers who'd built it had been scattered. Some fled east with retreating German forces, others simply disappeared into the chaos of liberation. Claude Mercier wouldn't come forward with his testimony for another 2 years, and by then, the search had been abandoned. The mystery deepened when Allied intelligence attempted to track Hartmann himself. His service record, meticulously maintained through 1944, simply stopped in April 1945. No death certificate, no POW record, no war crimes prosecution. He appeared on no list of Nazi officers who'd fled to South America or been captured by the Soviets. It was as if Oberst Ernst Hartmann had been erased from history the moment he'd sent that final transmission from beneath the limestone hills of Lorraine. Decades passed. The quarries of Lorraine became tourist attractions, their wartime history sanitized into historical curiosities. The French government sealed most of the deeper tunnels, citing safety concerns about unstable rock and unexploded ordnance. The generation that had lived through the occupation aged and died, taking their memories with them. Speerbreaker faded from a mystery into a ghost story, whispered about by amateur historians and conspiracy theorists who speculated about Nazi treasure, secret weapons, occult experiments. None of them came close to the truth. The breakthrough came in 2011, 66 years after Hartmann's disappearance, from a source that had nothing to do with historical research or wartime mysteries. A French mining company conducting geological surveys for a proposed limestone quarry expansion deployed ground-penetrating radar to map the subsurface structure. On August 17, 2011, their equipment detected an anomaly. A void space, massive and clearly artificial, located 120 feet beneath the surface in an area that official records insisted was solid bedrock. The radar signature showed walls too regular to be natural, chambers arranged in geometric patterns, and metallic structures that suggested extensive fortification. Within 72 hours, the French Ministry of Defense had classified the site and deployed military engineers to investigate. What they found would finally answer questions that had haunted historians for more than half a century. But it would also raise new questions, far more disturbing than the mystery of a vanished German colonel. Because Speerbreaker wasn't just a command post, it was something far more complex, far more carefully planned, and far more terrifying in its implications. The first breach into Hartmann's underground complex came on September 3, 2011. It took 2 weeks of careful excavation to locate and expose the primary entrance, still sealed exactly as Hartmann had left it 66 years earlier. When cutting torches finally penetrated the steel door, releasing a gust of stale air that hadn't moved since 1945, the investigation team paused. Because carved into that steel, in precise German script, was a message that stopped them cold. Wer eintritt, trägt die Verantwortung. Whoever enters bears the responsibility. The archaeological team stood at the threshold of a sealed tomb, staring at a warning written by a man who'd vanished into darkness 66 years ago. And slowly, inevitably, they crossed it, descending into depths where Ernst Hartmann had built something that was never meant to be found. Something he'd spent his final days preparing, protecting, or perhaps trying to prevent from ever being discovered. The descent was about to begin, and what waited in the depths of Speerbreaker would force everyone involved to confront a possibility more disturbing than any wartime mystery. That perhaps Ernst Hartmann hadn't vanished. Perhaps he'd simply been waiting for someone to open the door he'd sealed, waiting to pass on a responsibility that had consumed the last 66 years of his life. waiting in the dark beneath the limestone hills where time moved differently and the war had never truly ended. The first level of Spurbraker appeared frozen in time, preserved by the sealed environment like a photograph from 1945. The archaeological team descended the main access tunnel, their flashlights cutting through darkness that had remained undisturbed for 66 years. What they found defied every expectation of an abandoned military installation. The command center occupied a circular chamber 40 meters in diameter, exactly as Claude Mercier had described in his 1947 testimony. But it wasn't empty. Desks remained in place, covered with documents that crumbled at the slightest touch. Maps still hung on walls, showing not military positions but geological surveys of underground formations across France, Germany, and Eastern Europe. Communication equipment sat silent but intact, as if the operators had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. But it was the condition of everything that disturbed the investigators. No signs of hasty evacuation, no scattered papers or overturned furniture suggesting panic or chaos. Everything was organized, methodical, positioned with deliberate care, as if whoever had been here last had known they wouldn't be returning and had arranged things for someone who would come later. Someone like the team now standing in this preserved tomb, 66 years too late. Dr. Philippe Moreau, the archaeologist leading the excavation, found Hartmann's first journal in the command center office, lying open on a desk as if waiting to be read. The entries began in October 1943, documenting construction progress in technical, emotionless language. But as the months progressed, the tone shifted in ways that sent chills through everyone who read them. January 12, 1944. The secondary chambers are complete. We've reinforced them beyond military specifications, but I no longer believe we're preparing for conventional warfare. The maps I've been compiling show patterns that military intelligence dismisses as coincidence. Underground water systems that connect across impossible distances, cave formations that align with astronomical phenomena, Roman catacombs built on foundations that predate Rome by millennia. Someone was here before us. Someone who understood what lay beneath the surface. February brought entries that suggested Hartmann's project had evolved far beyond its official parameters. February 28th. The deliveries continue. Berlin doesn't question my requisitions, perhaps because no one wants to know what we're actually doing down here. The crates contain artifacts recovered from excavations across occupied Europe, objects that don't fit any historical timeline. Inscriptions in languages that predate written history, and devices, mechanisms whose function remains unclear but whose construction suggests knowledge we shouldn't possess. I've created a secure vault for storage. Only I have access. Only I need to know. By April 1944, Hartmann's handwriting had begun to deteriorate, the measured engineer's script giving way to something more erratic. April 19th. The night workers report sounds from deeper in the quarry system, from sections we haven't excavated. Voices, they claim, though no one has entered those tunnels. I've investigated personally and found nothing. But the acoustic properties of limestone can create strange effects. Water flowing through hidden passages, air pressure changes, natural phenomena that sound almost human. Almost. I've sealed those sections regardless. Some doors are meant to remain closed. The journal's tone grew increasingly paranoid through summer and fall. September 3, 1944. 3 of my men have requested transfer. They complain of dreams, always the same dream. Walking through tunnels that spiral down forever, following a sound like machinery but with a rhythm that's organic, alive. They reach a chamber where something waits in the darkness, something vast and patient and aware. They wake before seeing what it is, but they feel its attention on them, pressing against their thoughts even when awake. I've granted their transfers. I cannot afford instability, and perhaps I envy them their escape. By December 1944, with the war clearly lost and Allied forces advancing, Hartmann's entries revealed a man racing against time. December 17th. I've begun the final phase. The archive must be completed before evacuation becomes necessary. Everything I've discovered, every pattern I've identified, every artifact we've collected, it must be preserved. Not for the Reich, which is dying and deserves its fate, but for whoever comes after, for the civilization that rises from our ashes. They need to know what we found, what we almost awakened, what must never be disturbed again. The final entry before Hartmann's last transmission was dated April 27, 1945. Tomorrow I send the garrison to the surface. They've served loyally, but they cannot know what I'm about to do. The secondary routes must be collapsed, the access points sealed in ways that appear natural. Only the primary entrance will remain, and I'll secure it from within. The archive will be protected, the artifacts will be contained, and I will stand watch for as long as necessary to ensure what lies beneath remains sleeping. This is my penance, my duty, my choice. Dr. Moreau's team spent days documenting the first level before descending deeper. The stairwell to the second level spiraled down through solid limestone, carved with precision that seemed excessive for simple military construction. The walls showed tool marks that puzzled the engineers, wrong angles for the equipment available in 1944, wrong depth for the force that could be applied, as if the passages had been cut by something other than standard quarry machinery. The second level revealed what Hartmann had been protecting. The vault he'd mentioned in his journal stood at the center of a large chamber, a steel door sealed with a locking mechanism so complex that modern engineers spent 3 days analyzing it before attempting entry. When they finally opened it on September 28, 2011, what they found inside challenged every assumption about Hartmann's project. Artifacts. Hundreds of them. Carefully labeled, documented with photographs and detailed notes, arranged in climate-controlled cases that had somehow remained functional for 66 years. Stone tablets covered with inscriptions that matched no known language. Metallic objects of uncertain purpose showing manufacturing techniques that predated the Bronze Age. And maps, dozens of maps, showing underground networks that connected across vast distances, marked with symbols that appeared on artifacts from completely different time periods and geographic regions. But it was the documents that truly shocked the investigation team. Hartmann hadn't just been collecting artifacts, he'd been researching them, attempting to decode them, following patterns that led him to a conclusion that appeared repeatedly in his later notes. We are not the first technological civilization. We're not even the fifth. They all reached this point. They all discovered what lies beneath. And they all made the same mistake. They opened doors they couldn't close. They awakened something that consumed them. We're about to do the same unless someone stops it. The third level, the deepest part of Sperrbreaker, was sealed behind a second vault door. This one bore no lock, only a message carved directly into the steel in German. Beyond this point lies the reason I remain. Do not proceed unless you understand the responsibility. What sleeps below must continue sleeping. What waits in darkness must never see light. If you open this door, you inherit my duty. You become the guardian, and you will spend the rest of your life ensuring no one else makes the mistake I almost made. Dr. Moreau stood before that door for 3 hours, reading and rereading Hartmann's warning. His team argued. Some insisted they had to see what lay beyond, that historical documentation required complete investigation. Others wanted to seal the entire complex immediately, to respect Hartmann's wishes and avoid whatever he'd feared. The debate continued for days while the French government deliberated on how to proceed. The decision was made at the highest levels of the Ministry of Defense. The door would be opened. A team of specialists, archaeologists, engineers, and military personnel would document whatever lay beyond. Then the entire complex would be sealed permanently, the location classified, the truth buried under layers of official secrecy. On October 15, 2011, the third vault was breached. What the team found in the chamber beyond would remain classified for years, released only in heavily redacted form in 2019 after sustained pressure from historians. But those who were present that day, the 12 people who descended into that final chamber, all reported the same thing in their individual debriefings. The chamber was natural, not excavated. A vast cavity in the limestone, formed by geological processes millions of years old. But carved into its walls, floor, and ceiling were symbols. Thousands of them, identical to the inscriptions on artifacts in Hartmann's vault. Identical to patterns found in ancient sites across Europe and beyond. And in the center of the chamber, surrounded by equipment that Hartmann had clearly installed to contain or study it, was a structure. It appeared to be made of stone, but analysis showed it was something else. Crystallized limestone transformed at a molecular level through processes that modern science couldn't replicate. It was shaped like a doorway, an arch 10 feet tall and 6 feet wide, its surface perfectly smooth except for a series of recessed panels that seemed designed to receive something. Keys, perhaps, or artifacts, or specific knowledge about how to activate it. And sitting against the wall, directly facing that doorway, was a body. Forensic examination would confirm what everyone already knew. Oberst Ernst Hartmann had spent 66 years in that chamber. The evidence was impossible but undeniable. His body showed signs of extreme age, far beyond what should have been possible for someone who would have been in his 40s when he sealed himself inside. His clothing had deteriorated, but his uniform insignia remained identifiable, and clutched in his hands was a journal, the final journal, filled with entries that spanned decades. The first entry was dated May 1st, 1945. I am alone. The war is over, Germany has fallen, but my duty continues. The doorway remains dormant, but I can feel it, waiting, watching. It knows I'm here. It knows I'm standing guard, and it's patient, far more patient than any human can be. But I will outlast it. I have to. Entries continued sporadically over the years, 1947, 1953, 1961, each one shorter than the last, as if the effort of writing was becoming increasingly difficult. 1969, 24 years. My body fails, but my purpose remains. I sleep rarely. I eat from stores that should have run out decades ago, but somehow replenish. Time moves differently here, or perhaps I move differently through time. The doorway whispers, not with sound, with possibility, showing me what waits on the other side. Civilization after civilization, reaching this same point, making this same discovery. All of them gone now, consumed by what they released. I will not let us make that mistake. The final entry, dated April 2011, just months before the complex was discovered, contained only a few words in handwriting so weak it was barely legible. They're coming. The new seekers. They'll find this place. They'll open the doors. I've done all I can. The warning is carved. The responsibility is theirs now. May they be wiser than I was. May they choose guardianship over curiosity. The archaeological team stood in that chamber, reading the final words of a man who'd spent 66 years alone in the dark, standing watch over something that shouldn't exist. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Had Hartmann actually lived that long? Or had time behaved differently in that sealed chamber? And more importantly, what was the doorway he'd been guarding? What waited on the other side? The French government made its decision swiftly and decisively. Spurbreaker was sealed. The entrance was collapsed with controlled explosives, the tunnels were filled with concrete, and the entire area was classified as a military exclusion zone. Official records listed it as containing unstable explosives and hazardous materials. The truth was buried under layers of bureaucracy and national security classifications. But those 12 people who'd descended to that final chamber, who'd stood in the presence of Hartmann's preserved body and read his decades-long vigil, all reported the same experience in their private testimonies. The doorway had felt aware, not active, not dangerous, but aware. as if something on the other side was pressing against the barrier, testing its strength, waiting for the moment when curiosity would overcome caution and someone would try to open it. Dr. Moreau resigned from the project 3 months after the excavation ended. He refused to discuss Spearbreaker in any context, even with colleagues who'd shared the experience. But a friend who knew him well described the change in his demeanor. The way he avoided underground spaces, the nightmares he mentioned once about standing guard in darkness while something vast and patient pressed against a door that was slowly, inevitably beginning to open. In 2019, facing terminal illness, Dr. Moreau finally broke his silence in a recorded interview that was immediately classified and then partially released after his death. His final statement, delivered with absolute conviction, has become the stuff of legend among those who know the true story of Spearbreaker. Colonel Hartman understood something that we're only beginning to grasp. Humanity's technological progress follows a pattern. We rise from savagery, develop science, reach toward the stars, and eventually discover certain fundamental truths about reality. Truths that open doorways, literally, doorways to places, or states of being, or consciousnesses that we're not ready to comprehend. Every civilization before us found those doorways. Every one of them opened them, and every one of them disappeared. Hartman found evidence of this cycle. And he made a choice. He became the guardian. He stood watch for 66 years to give us a chance to be different, to be wiser, to choose preservation over exploration. The question is, will we honor his sacrifice, or will we make the same mistake that erased every civilization before us? The answer remains uncertain, because in restricted military archives, in reports that few have clearance to read, there are references to other sites, other doorways, found beneath Rome, beneath Cairo, beneath cities in China and South America, and deep in the Australian outback. All of them sealed, all of them guarded, either by ancient warnings or modern governments who've learned what Hartman discovered in the limestone chambers of Lorraine. The pattern exists, the doorways exist. And the question facing humanity is the same question Hartman wrestled with alone in the dark for 66 years. Do we honor the warnings left by those who came before? Or do we, in our certainty that we're different, that we're special, that we're wiser, reach for the same knowledge that destroyed every previous civilization? Colonel Ernst Hartman believed he knew the answer. He gave his life to ensure we'd have the choice. The choice to be guardians rather than explorers, protectors rather than conquerors, the civilization that finally breaks the cycle, or the last in a long line of the forgotten. Deep beneath the hills of Lorraine, sealed behind concrete and classified beyond public knowledge, that choice waits. And somewhere, in places that exist outside normal space and time, something patient and vast and utterly inhuman waits as well. Waits for the moment when human curiosity finally overcomes ancient wisdom, when the doors open fully, when the cycle completes one final time. Hartman stood guard for 66 years. The question is, who guards the door now?